Christmas used to arrive long before the snow. At least, that's how Margaret remembered it. Back then, it came in the smell of cinnamon drifting through her tiny kitchen, in the sound of little footsteps racing down the hallway before sunrise, in the crooked paper stars her daughter insisted on taping to every wall, even though they kept falling off. Now, Christmas arrived in silence. Margaret stood beside the frosted living room window, watching snowflakes dance beneath the yellow streetlights. The neighborhood sparkled with decorations. Every house seemed alive. Children laughed outside. Someone across the street was hanging one last string of lights while music floated softly through the cold air. She smiled anyway. Some habits never leave you. She reached over and switched on the old Christmas tree she'd owned for nearly 30 years. Only half the lights still worked. One branch leaned awkwardly to the left, and several ornaments had faded until their colors were almost forgotten. It was still beautiful to her. She gently straightened a tiny angel ornament. "I remember when Emily made you." Her fingers trembled slightly. "She said your wings looked like pancakes." Margaret laughed to herself. "And honestly, they still do." The room answered with silence. She didn't mind silence as much anymore. Loneliness had a way of becoming furniture. At first, it felt strange. Then familiar. Eventually, you forgot life had ever sounded different. She slowly walked into the kitchen and placed another log into the fireplace. The kettle began to whistle. Instead of preparing a feast like she once had, she made herself a single cup of tea and one small grilled cheese sandwich. Years ago, this table barely held everything: turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, cookies. Emily always burned because she insisted she didn't need a recipe. Now there was one plate, one cup, one chair. Margaret looked toward the empty seat across from her. "I still set it sometimes." She smiled at the chair as though someone sat there. "I know, silly, isn't it?" The chair kept its secret. After lunch, she opened the hallway closet. Inside sat dozens of dusty boxes. Carefully, she lifted one down. Photographs, thousands of them. She carried the heavy box into the living room and sat beside the tree. The first picture showed Emily at 5 years old, missing 2 front teeth, holding a candy cane almost as tall as her arm. Margaret couldn't help laughing. "Oh, sweetheart, you cried because Santa wrapped the wrong doll." Another photo, Emily wearing pajamas covered in snowmen, face covered with chocolate frosting. Margaret remembered every detail. "You blamed the dog. You didn't even have a dog." She laughed so hard she had to wipe away tears. Funny how laughter and tears shared the same doorway. Another picture, Emily at 16. Standing beside the Christmas tree wearing a red sweater she'd complained was itchy. "I look ridiculous." "No," Margaret had told her. "You look loved." Emily rolled her eyes. "Mom, nobody says that." Margaret whispered to the photograph. "I still do." Her smile slowly faded. The newer photographs became fewer. College graduation. A wedding. One family vacation. Then, nothing. Phones had replaced photographs. Text messages replaced handwritten letters. Video calls replaced visits. And eventually, even those became rare. Margaret reached for her cell phone resting beside the couch. No new messages. She checked again. Nothing. Maybe Emily was busy. She always was. Busy with work, busy with meetings, busy raising her own children, busy living. Margaret understood. She truly did. Children weren't supposed to spend their lives taking care of their parents. Parents were supposed to let go. That was love. Wasn't it? She placed the phone back down. A few minutes later, she picked it up again. Still nothing. Outside, another family arrived carrying wrapped presents. Children jumped from the car shouting with excitement. Margaret watched them through the window. One little boy suddenly noticed her standing there. He smiled, then waved. Margaret waved back immediately. His mother looked toward the window and smiled politely before leading him inside. The curtains closed. The street became quiet again. Margaret wrapped her sweater tighter around herself. The fireplace crackled gently. She stared at the dancing flames. "Don't be disappointed." She said it softly, almost like reminding herself. "She's happy. That's what matters." Still, she couldn't stop remembering last Christmas. Emily had promised. "Next year, Mom. I promise. We'll spend the whole day together." Margaret had believed her. Promises sounded warmer at Christmas. Her phone buzzed. She nearly dropped her tea rushing to answer it. Her heart pounded. Emily. Finally, she smiled before opening the message. Merry Christmas, Mom. Sorry we're so busy today. We're at Jason's parents' house. Love you. We'll call tomorrow. That was it. 21 words. Margaret stared at the screen for a long time, then locked the phone. She smiled again. A practiced smile, the kind mothers become experts at wearing. No worries, sweetheart. She whispered to an empty room. I understand. But her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She stood, walked to the tree, and carefully placed one wrapped present underneath. It had Emily's name written in careful handwriting. Just one gift, like every year, even though every year it stayed there until January. Margaret touched the ribbon gently. I'll keep waiting. Because mothers always do. She turned off the living room lights, leaving only the glow of the old Christmas tree. Outside, the snow continued falling. Inside, the silence grew heavier. Margaret never noticed the faint cough she tried to hide. She never noticed how long it took her to catch her breath after climbing the stairs. She never noticed the unopened envelope sitting beneath a stack of bills on the kitchen counter. An envelope with her doctor's name printed across the top. She looked at it once, then quietly turned away. Some news could wait until after Christmas. Or so she believed. She had no idea that by sunrise, everything she had been protecting her daughter from would become impossible to hide. And Emily, laughing around another family's Christmas table, had no idea that this quiet Christmas night was already becoming a memory she would spend the rest of her life wishing she could relive. Morning arrived quietly, as if even the sun knew it shouldn't disturb the peace inside Margaret's little house. The snow had covered every rooftop overnight. Outside, children bundled in oversized coats were already building snowmen, their laughter floating through the crisp winter air. Margaret stood at the kitchen window with a warm mug of tea cupped between both hands. She smiled at the sound. Children always sounded like Christmas. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, and the years slipped away. She could almost hear another little voice. Mom. Don't look. I'm wrapping your present. Margaret laughed softly. I wasn't looking. You were. I absolutely wasn't. You peeked. I was only checking if you needed tape. No. That's cheating. Margaret opened her eyes again. The kitchen was empty. Only the old clock answered with its steady ticking. Time had become louder since the house grew quiet. She carried her tea into the living room and sat beside the Christmas tree. The wrapped gift with Emily's name still rested beneath its branches. She reached into the photo box again. There were hundreds left. One picture stopped her immediately. Emily couldn't have been older than 7. She stood proudly beside a tiny bicycle with bright pink ribbons hanging from the handlebars. Margaret traced the edge of the photograph with her fingertips. Oh, that bicycle. She remembered every penny it had cost back then. Money wasn't just tight, it was almost impossible. Emily had wanted that bicycle since spring. Every afternoon, they walked past the toy store after school. Every afternoon, Emily slowed down just enough to admire it through the glass. She never asked, not once. She simply looked at it with those hopeful little eyes before walking away. Margaret noticed. Of course she noticed. Mothers always do. That winter, Margaret cleaned offices during the day. At night she washed dishes in a restaurant until nearly midnight. When she came home, her feet ached so badly she sometimes cried while taking off her shoes. But every morning, she got up and did it all again. Not because she loved working, because she loved one little girl more than sleep, more than comfort, more than herself. The week before Christmas, the bicycle disappeared from the toy store window. Margaret's heart sank. She thought someone else had bought it. She cried all the way home that evening. Not because Emily had complained. Emily never complained. She cried because she couldn't give her daughter the one thing she'd dreamed about all year. The next morning, Margaret stopped by the shop anyway. The owner smiled the moment she walked in. I've been waiting for you. Margaret looked confused. The bicycle? He nodded. I saw your daughter looking at it every day. He disappeared into the back room before returning with the little pink bicycle. I hid it. Margaret stared at him. You hid it? He smiled. I figured her mother was trying her best. Margaret's eyes filled instantly. I don't have enough. You do. He named a price that was almost half of what it had been. She tried to protest. He simply shook his head. Merry Christmas. Margaret never forgot his kindness. Neither did Emily. On Christmas morning, Emily ran into the living room wearing snowman pajamas. She froze. The bicycle stood beside the tree with a giant red bow. For 3 whole seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she screamed so loudly the neighbors knocked to make sure everything was all right. She threw her arms around Margaret so tightly they both fell onto the carpet laughing. "You did it. You really did it." Margaret could still feel those tiny arms around her. She pressed the photograph against her heart. "I'd buy that bicycle 1,000 times again. Even if it meant working 3 jobs instead of 2. Even if it meant another 100 sleepless nights, every sacrifice had been worth seeing Emily smile, every single one. Another photograph slipped from the pile. This one was different. Emily was 12. Her school held a Christmas concert. All the children wore matching white dresses and suits. Margaret had promised she'd be there, but that afternoon, her supervisor refused to let her leave work. "If you go now, don't bother coming back tomorrow." Margaret looked at the clock. The concert started in 45 minutes. Her job paid the rent. Without it, there would be no home. She stayed. Every minute felt like an hour. The moment her shift ended, she ran 6 blocks through the snow. She arrived breathless. The auditorium was nearly empty. Parents were helping children gather their coats. Emily sat alone on the edge of the stage, still wearing her little white dress, swinging her feet. Waiting, the teacher smiled gently. She said her mom always keeps her promises. Margaret felt something break inside her. "I'm so sorry." Emily looked up. The biggest smile spread across her face. "You came." Margaret dropped to her knees and hugged her. "I missed it." Emily shrugged. "That's okay. You worked today. We need groceries." The words sounded far too grown-up for a 12-year-old. Margaret held her even tighter. "I'm sorry." Emily whispered into her shoulder. "I saved something for you." She stepped back and began singing the Christmas song she'd performed earlier just for her mother. An empty auditorium became the most beautiful concert Margaret had ever attended. She applauded until her hands hurt. Afterward, they stopped for hot chocolate. 1 cup. 2 straws. Emily insisted it tasted better that way. Margaret smiled through fresh tears. "You always made everything easier." The fire crackled softly beside her. The photograph blurred as another tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away before it landed. "No crying." She chuckled. "You hated when I cried." Her eyes wandered toward the hallway. Emily's old bedroom door remained exactly as she'd left it years ago. Margaret still dusted the shelves every week, still washed the blankets, still kept Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit sitting neatly on the pillow. People told her to turn the room into an office. Or a sewing room. Or rent it out. Margaret always smiled politely. No. Because to her, it wasn't an empty room. It was hope. Hope that one day Emily might stay the night again. Hope that her grandchildren would race down that hallway the way Emily once had. Hope didn't cost anything. So she held on to it. The afternoon sun began to fade. Margaret stood slowly, one hand resting on the arm of the chair longer than usual before she could straighten herself. A wave of dizziness passed over her. She closed her eyes. It disappeared after a moment. "I'm all right." She whispered the words to no one. She walked into the kitchen to prepare dinner. Halfway there, another cough escaped her. This one lasted longer, much longer. When it finally stopped, she reached for the countertop to steady herself. Her breathing was shallow. She looked toward the unopened envelope still lying beneath the stack of bills. The doctor's name stared back at her. This time, she picked it up. She held it in both hands for nearly a minute. Then, with trembling fingers, she slowly opened the envelope. As her eyes moved across the first few lines, the color drained from her face. The paper slipped from her hands onto the kitchen floor. Margaret lowered herself into a chair. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply looked toward the living room, where Emily's Christmas present still waited beneath the glowing tree. Then she whispered just 5 words. "I need one more Christmas." Outside, the church bells began ringing. Inside, Margaret quietly folded the letter back into its envelope. She had made a decision. Emily would not hear a single word about it, not until Christmas was over, because mothers have a remarkable way of protecting their children, even when there is almost nothing left to protect. Margaret barely slept that night. The doctor's letter remained folded neatly inside its envelope, resting on the nightstand beside her bed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same sentence staring back at her. She could have called Emily. She could have picked up the phone right then and told her everything. Emily would have come. Margaret knew she would. She also knew exactly what would happen afterward. Emily would cancel work. The children would leave school. Jason would drive through the night. Everyone would worry. Everyone would cry. And Christmas would never be Christmas again. Margaret slowly shook her head. No. She whispered into the darkness. Not yet. Outside, snow continued falling, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, the old clock ticked faithfully toward another morning. Across the state, Emily stood in a crowded kitchen surrounded by noise. Her mother had always dreamed of a house like this, children chasing each other, adults laughing over burnt cinnamon rolls, someone arguing about whether the turkey was cooking too slowly. Music playing louder than necessary. It should have felt warm. Instead, Emily couldn't stop glancing at her phone. Her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, tugged gently on her sweater. Mom? Emily looked down. What is it, sweetheart? When are we going to Grandma's? Emily forced a smile. We'll visit after Christmas. Lily frowned. But you said that last Christmas. Emily froze. Children remembered everything, even the promises adults hoped they'd forgotten. Jason walked over carrying a tray of cookies. They're asking when we're opening presents. Emily nodded absent-mindedly. I'll be there. But she wasn't really there, not completely. Something tugged quietly at the edge of her heart, something she couldn't explain. Later that afternoon, Emily stepped outside to answer a work call. It lasted nearly 40 minutes. By the time she hung up, dozens of unread messages waited on her screen. Most were from coworkers. A few from friends. One from her mother. Emily smiled. Finally, she opened it. There was no complaint. No guilt. No sadness. Just one photograph. The old Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner of the living room. Beneath it, one wrapped gift. The caption read, "The tree still looks a little crooked, just the way you used to like it. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I hope you're making beautiful memories today. I love you more than words will ever say." Emily stared at the message. She smiled, then typed quickly. Love you too, Mom. Sorry today is so crazy. We'll have a long visit soon, I promise. She hit send. Almost instantly, 3 little dots appeared. Margaret was typing. Emily waited. The dots disappeared. Nothing came. She waited another minute. Still nothing. Mom? Emily whispered, then she shrugged. She probably got distracted. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. She never realized Margaret had started writing a reply, then quietly erased every single word. Back at the little house, Margaret sat at her dining table with a stack of cream-colored stationery. She hadn't written a real letter in years. Her handwriting wasn't as steady as it used to be. Still, she carefully wrote at the top of the page, "My dearest Emily." She stopped, crossed it out, started again. Oh my beautiful daughter. No, that didn't feel right either. She sighed and smiled to herself. I've always overthought everything. After another moment, she finally began. If you're reading this, it means I never found the right moment to tell you everything face to face. She paused. A tear landed softly on the paper. Margaret dabbed it away before the ink could blur. First, I need you to know something. You have never been a disappointment to me. Not once. Not when you forgot to call. Not when life became busy. Not when holidays changed. Being your mother has been the greatest honor of my life. She stopped writing. The room became blurry again. How could a few sentences possibly contain an entire lifetime of love? She folded the unfinished letter and reached for another sheet. This one was for Lily, her granddaughter. Dear Lily, I hope one day you love your mother the way she has always loved you. She may forget where she left her glasses. She may burn the cookies. She may worry too much. But every time she says, "Drive safely," what she really means is, "Please come back to me." Margaret smiled through tears. She could almost hear Lily's tiny voice reading it years from now. The next morning, Margaret visited the small bakery on the corner. The young cashier looked up and smiled. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Parker." "Merry Christmas, dear." "The usual loaf?" Actually, Margaret looked at the display case. "I'd like 6 cinnamon rolls." The cashier blinked. "Expecting company?" Margaret smiled warmly. "I hope so." The young woman wrapped them carefully. As Margaret reached for her purse, she noticed a little boy staring longingly at one of the decorated cookies. His mother quietly counted coins in her hand. She didn't have enough. Margaret pretended not to notice. She simply turned to the cashier. "I'll take that cookie too." The mother looked embarrassed. "Oh no, you don't have to." Margaret knelt beside the little boy. "I bought too many." She winked. "Would you help me by eating one?" His face lit up brighter than the Christmas lights outside. "Really? I'd be doing me a favor." He hugged the cookie to his chest like treasure. His mother whispered, "Thank you." Margaret only smiled. "You'll understand someday." As she walked home carrying her small paper bag, she whispered to herself, kindness should never retire. That evening, she unlocked an old wooden chest hidden beneath her bed. Inside were dozens of carefully labeled envelopes. Emily, age 5. Emily, first day of school. Emily, graduation. Wedding day. Every milestone had its own letter. Letters Margaret had written but never given. She picked one at random. Inside was a note dated nearly 20 years earlier. "Today you slammed your bedroom door and shouted that you hated me. I cried after you left for school. Not because you hurt my feelings. Because I knew one day you'd grow up enough to regret saying it. When that day comes, I hope you forgive yourself long before you ask me to." Margaret smiled. Teenagers, they always believed words lasted forever. Parents knew better. Love outlasted angry moments. Every time she returned the letter carefully, then looked toward the newest empty envelope. Its front simply read, "Open last." She placed her hand over it. Not yet. Late that night, her phone rang. Margaret's heart leaped. "Emily?" But it wasn't Dot, it was her doctor. "Mrs. Parker. I wanted to make sure you understood the results." Margaret looked toward the glowing Christmas tree. "Yes. And have you told your family?" A long silence followed. Finally, "No. I really think you should." Margaret swallowed hard. "I will. When the time is right." After hanging up, she sat in the darkness for nearly an hour. Then she reached into a drawer. She pulled out an old digital voice recorder Emily had bought her years ago. "You always forget your shopping lists," Emily had laughed. "Record them instead." Margaret turned it over in her hands. She pressed the power button. A tiny red light blinked to life. She stared at it for a long time, then quietly whispered, "Maybe it's time I recorded something much more important than groceries." She took a slow breath. Her finger hovered over the record button, and as the little red light began to blink steadily, Margaret opened her mouth to leave behind the words she prayed her daughter would never have to hear. Margaret stared at the blinking red light on the voice recorder. For the first time in years, she couldn't find the right words. She had spent her whole life talking to Emily. She had explained scraped knees, broken hearts, fractions, recipes, how to tie a scarf, how to drive in the snow, how to survive disappointment. Yet now, when only a few words truly mattered, her voice refused to come. She pressed the button. The recording stopped. "No," she whispered. "That isn't how I want her to remember me." She tried again. This time she smiled first, the way she always had before speaking to her daughter. The recorder clicked. "Hello, sweetheart." She stopped. Too formal. Emily had never been sweetheart. "Not really," she laughed quietly. "There I go, overthinking again." She deleted the recording. Another attempt. "Hi, Emmy." That felt right. Only Margaret still called her Emmy. Not coworkers, not friends, not even Jason, only her mother. Margaret closed her eyes. The words finally began to flow. "Hi, Emmy. If you're listening to this," she paused. "No." She shook her head again. "I'm making this sound like a movie." She sighed, then smiled toward the Christmas tree. "Let's just pretend we're sitting in the kitchen together. You've got your feet up on the chair even though I told you 1,000 times not to. And you're stealing cookie dough while pretending you're only checking if it's sweet enough." A tiny laugh escaped her. "I always knew. I just wanted you to think you were getting away with something." Her eyes shimmered. "You were never very sneaky." She wiped away another tear. "I've been thinking a lot lately. You know, people spend so much time worrying about the things they didn't have. But when I think about my life, I don't remember the hard days first. I remember your laugh. I remember tiny shoes lined up by the front door. I remember bedtime stories. I remember the first time you rode your bicycle without training wheels. You were so proud. I pretended not to notice when you kept riding past the house over and over just to make sure I was watching. I was always watching. The room fell quiet, even the fire seemed to soften. Margaret took a careful breath. Emmy, I hope you've never wondered if you were enough. You were. Every single day. I know life became busy. I know work never seemed to end. I know children grow faster than anyone expects. And if you've ever felt guilty because we didn't spend enough time together, please don't. Her voice cracked. I never counted the holidays you missed. I counted every hug you gave me. I never measured love by hours. I measured it by your heart. A tear slid slowly down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away this time. You gave me a beautiful life. You just don't realize it yet. She pressed stop. The room became silent once more. Margaret listened to the recording. It sounded gentle, but something was missing. She knew exactly what. The truth. She couldn't leave Emily with only memories. She had to leave her courage too. She pressed record again. There's something I didn't tell you. I wanted one more peaceful Christmas for you. One more Christmas where your biggest worry was whether Lily got too much frosting on her dress. I wanted you to laugh. I wanted the children to wake up believing the world was still simple. So if you're hearing this, it means I chose silence. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I loved you. She looked toward the doctor's letter resting quietly on the table. I've had a wonderful life. Not a perfect one, but a wonderful one. Please don't spend your days asking yourself why I didn't call. Ask yourself something better. Did she know I loved her? The answer is yes. I knew. I always knew. The next afternoon, Margaret bundled herself in her old wool coat and walked slowly toward the neighborhood park. The snow crunched beneath every careful step. Children were everywhere, building snow forts, throwing snowballs, laughing until they could barely breathe. Margaret found an empty bench beneath the same oak tree where she had watched Emily play decades earlier. She smiled. Some things never changed. A little girl wandered over, dragging a tiny sled behind her. Excuse me. Margaret looked up. Yes? Can you hold Mr. Snowy's hat? She held up a knitted blue cap. Margaret laughed. Who's Mr. Snowy? My snowman. He keeps losing his hat. Margaret accepted the tiny cap with great seriousness. Well, we certainly can't have that. Together they walked over to the snowman. Margaret carefully placed the hat on its snowy head. The little girl clapped. He looks handsome now. I think he agrees. The child's grandmother approached, slightly out of breath. I'm so sorry if she bothered you. Not at all. Margaret smiled. She reminded me of someone. The older woman smiled knowingly. A granddaughter? My daughter. They exchanged the kind of look only mothers understood. Point one filled with memories no one else could see. As the grandmother and little girl walked away, the child turned back and waved enthusiastically. Merry Christmas. Margaret waved until they disappeared behind the trees. Then she whispered, Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Though she wasn't sure whether she meant the little girl or Emily. That evening, Margaret stopped by the cemetery. Snow rested gently upon the rows of quiet stones. She walked to one simple grave. Hello, Thomas. Her husband's name gone for nearly 20 years. She brushed fresh snow from the headstone. You'd laugh if you saw me talking to you. She smiled softly. I still miss your terrible jokes. And how you always burned the toast. She looked down. Our little girl turned out beautifully. You'd be proud. She's strong. So very strong. A cold breeze drifted through the cemetery. Margaret pulled her scarf tighter. I think, she hesitated. I think my time with her is almost finished. The words hung in the frozen air. She rested one gloved hand against the cold stone. So when I see you again, don't ask me how heaven looks. I'll probably spend the first hour telling you stories about Emily. She laughed quietly. You know me. I never could stop talking about our girl. When Margaret returned home, dusk had settled over the neighborhood. The little house glowed warmly against the snow. She unlocked the front door. For a moment, she simply stood inside looking around. The worn sofa, the faded curtains, the bookshelf Thomas had built, the height marks on the hallway wall that she never painted over, every scratch, every photograph, every memory. It wasn't just a house. It was an entire lifetime. She slowly walked to the Christmas tree, then knelt with some difficulty. From the bottom drawer of the cabinet, she removed a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver snowflake necklace. Emily had admired it years ago in a jewelry store window but insisted it was too expensive. Margaret had secretly bought it anyway. She never found the perfect moment to give it to her. Now she gently placed the box inside the wrapped Christmas present beneath the tree. She tied the ribbon once more, then added a handwritten tag. For my little girl. Not Emily. Not Mom's daughter. Just, my little girl. Because no matter how old children become, a mother's heart never updates their age. Margaret smiled at the gift. I hope you like it. Then she looked toward the voice recorder resting on the coffee table. She knew one recording wasn't enough. There was still one story, one confession, and one final Christmas memory that Emily had completely forgotten. But when she finally heard it, it would become the memory she treasured more than every present she'd ever opened. The house was unusually quiet the next morning, not the kind of quiet that felt empty. The kind that felt as if the walls themselves were listening. Margaret woke before sunrise, just as she had every Christmas morning for nearly 40 years. Her body moved more slowly now, but her heart still followed the same old traditions. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked into the kitchen. The coffee pot sputtered as it always had. The old radio crackled before finding a station playing soft Christmas carols. She smiled. You're still alive, old thing. The radio answered with a burst of static before the music settled again. Margaret laughed. So stubborn. She poured herself a cup of coffee and carried it into the living room. The tree still glowed gently in the darkness. She sat in her favorite chair and watched it for a long time. People often asked why she decorated such a large tree when she lived alone. She never knew how to answer, because the truth was, she never decorated it for herself. She decorated it for hope. Hope that one Christmas, the front door would burst open. Hope that little feet would race across the floor again. Hope that someone would shout, "Grandma." Hope had kept her company for years, and somehow, it never grew tired. Her phone buzzed. Margaret's heart skipped. She reached for it quickly. A message from Emily. Good morning, Mom. Lily keeps talking about you. She says next Christmas has to be at your house. Margaret read it twice, then 3 times. Her smile was genuine this time. She typed slowly. I'd like that very much. She almost added another sentence. I don't know if I'll still be here. Her fingers stopped one by one. She erased the words. Instead, she sent only a heart emoji. Simple, warm enough. Emily replied almost instantly. Love you. Margaret placed the phone against her chest. I love you more. She whispered it into the quiet room, as though somehow her daughter might still hear it. Later that afternoon, Margaret pulled an old red recipe book from the kitchen shelf. Its pages were worn and stained with flour, butter, cinnamon, and decades of family dinners. Inside were dozens of handwritten notes. Emily likes extra vanilla. Thomas says less salt next time. Lily laughed when the cookies looked like elephants. Margaret smiled. She turned to the very last blank page carefully. She uncapped a pen. Instead of writing a recipe, she wrote something else. The secret ingredient. If my grandchildren ever ask why Grandma's cookies tasted different, tell them the secret wasn't cinnamon. It wasn't butter. It wasn't vanilla. The secret was time. Every cookie carried a conversation. Every pie carried a memory. Every meal carried love. Never rush the people sitting around your table. One day, you'll wish dinner had lasted just 5 minutes longer. Margaret rested the pen. A tear slipped quietly onto the page. She didn't wipe it away. Some recipes deserved a little salt. That evening, she decided to clean the attic, not because it needed cleaning, because she wanted to see everything one last time. The wooden stairs creaked beneath her careful steps. Dust floated through beams of winter sunlight filtering from the tiny attic window. There were boxes everywhere. Old Christmas decorations. Thomas's fishing gear. Emily's school projects. A tiny cardboard Castle made from cereal boxes. Margaret picked it up carefully. Across the front, written in crooked purple marker, were the words Princess Emily's Castle. Margaret laughed so hard she had to sit down. I remember this. Emily had spent 3 entire days building it. When it finally stood upright, their cat immediately jumped on top of it. The castle collapsed. Emily burst into tears. Thomas had looked at the broken cardboard masterpiece before saying, "Well, I guess the dragon won." Emily had stared at him for 2 seconds, then started laughing through her tears. By bedtime, the disaster had become everyone's favorite Christmas story. Margaret smiled at the memory. Funny how the moments that felt terrible at the time often became the ones families laughed about forever. She found another box. Inside lay dozens of homemade Christmas ornaments. One was made from popsicle sticks glued together unevenly. Another was covered in glitter that still managed to escape after 25 years. Margaret held up a crooked paper angel. Emily had made it in 2nd grade. Its wings pointed in different directions. Its smile was too big. One eye sat noticeably higher than the other. It still looks just like you drew it. Margaret laughed. Perfectly imperfect. She carefully returned every ornament to the box. Then stopped. At the very bottom, she found a folded piece of construction paper. The edges had turned yellow with age. Across the front, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Things I love about my mom." Margaret's hands trembled. She slowly unfolded it. "She hugs me even when I'm dirty. She makes pancakes shaped like stars. She laughs at my jokes even when they aren't funny. She always comes back." Margaret covered her mouth. She remembered the assignment. Emily's teacher had asked every student to write about someone they loved. The final line sat at the bottom of the page, written in oversized letters. "When I grow up, I never want my mom to feel lonely." Margaret couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came quietly, not because Emily had forgotten that promise, but because life had simply happened. Children don't stop loving their parents, they become parents themselves. Responsibilities multiply. Days become months. Months become years, and before anyone notices, the calendar has stolen another Christmas. Margaret kissed the old paper gently before placing it against her heart. "You kept your promise longer than you realize," she whispered. "I was never lonely while I was loving you." That night, Margaret returned to the dining table. One envelope remained, the one marked, "Open last." She slowly slid a fresh sheet of paper inside, then began writing. "Emily, there is one thing I never told you about your father." Margaret smiled softly. "Every Christmas Eve, after you went to sleep, he stood outside your bedroom door. He'd listen for a few seconds. Then he'd whisper, 'Thank you for making me a dad.' He thought I never heard him. I heard him every year. And after he was gone, I kept whispering the same words. 'Thank you for making me your mom.'" Margaret folded the letter carefully, placed it inside the envelope, sealed it. Then wrote across the front, "Please read this only after you've smiled again." She didn't want Emily's last memory of her to be grief. She wanted it to be gratitude for a life that had been ordinary, yet beautiful beyond measure. Margaret stood, turned off the lights, and looked one final time at the glowing Christmas tree. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, the little house held its breath. Far away, Emily tucked Lily into bed. She kissed her daughter's forehead. Lily wrapped tiny arms around her neck and whispered, "I love you forever, Mommy." Emily smiled. "I love you forever too." Neither of them noticed the missed call that had appeared on Emily's phone just moments earlier. It was from an unfamiliar number, a number connected to the small hospital just a few miles from Margaret's home, and by the time Emily finally noticed it, everything she believed could wait until tomorrow would already belong to yesterday. The missed call stayed unnoticed for nearly 2 hours. Emily's phone lay face down on the kitchen counter while the family gathered around the dinner table. Lily was proudly explaining how she had beaten everyone in a snowball fight. "I threw one at Grandpa," she giggled. "But it hit the mailbox instead." The room exploded with laughter. Even Grandpa pretended to rub his shoulder. "I still felt it." More laughter followed. Emily smiled. She laughed with everyone else, but every few minutes, her thoughts drifted somewhere else, toward a little house with an old Christmas tree, toward a woman who always answered the phone by saying, "Hello, my favorite daughter." Emily had once teased her. "I'm your only daughter." Margaret had smiled. "Exactly." After dinner, everyone gathered around the fireplace. The children tore into brightly wrapped presents. Paper flew through the air. Someone accidentally stepped on a bough. Jason was trying to assemble a toy train while pretending he didn't need the instruction manual. I know what I'm doing. 5 minutes later. Does anyone know where this will goes? Everyone burst into laughter. Emily watched the scene quietly. She should have been happy. She was happy. So why did her heart suddenly feel so heavy? Her phone vibrated again. This time she looked. One missed call. Unknown number. Another missed call. The same number. A voicemail. Emily frowned. She stepped into the hallway and pressed play. A calm voice answered. Hello, may I speak with Emily Parker, please? This is St. Anne's Medical Center. We're calling regarding your mother, Margaret Parker. Please return our call as soon as possible. Emily's smile disappeared. Her hands grew cold. She immediately called back. The line rang twice. A nurse answered. St. Anne's Medical Center. This is Emily Parker. My mother received a call from you. There was a pause. May I place you on a brief hold? Every second felt endless. Emily began pacing. No. No. Please, the nurse returned. Mrs. Parker? Yes. Your mother came into the emergency department earlier this evening. Emily stopped walking. What happened? She became weak while walking home. She's stable at the moment. But she'd like to see you. Emily leaned against the wall. Relief washed over her. She's okay? There was another silence, the kind professionals use when they're choosing their words carefully. She's asking for you. Emily's heart tightened. I'll leave right now. Within 15 minutes, Jason had loaded the car. The children, confused and sleepy, climbed into the back seat. What's wrong with Grandma? Lily asked softly. Emily forced a reassuring smile. We're going to visit her. Is she sick? Emily couldn't answer. She simply reached back and squeezed Lily's little hand. The snow had become heavier. Headlights reflected off endless white roads. The drive felt longer than ever before. Emily stared out the window. Memory after memory flooded her mind. Her first day of kindergarten, her mother waiting outside the classroom, the bicycle, the hot chocolate, every birthday cake. Every scraped knee, every late-night fever, every time her mother whispered, I'm here. Emily suddenly remembered something. 3 years earlier Margaret had asked, would you like to come over for Christmas this year? Emily had smiled apologetically. We already made plans. Maybe next year. Next year came, then another and another. Emily covered her face. What have I done? Jason reached across the console and gently held her hand. You didn't know. Emily shook her head. I should have. An hour into the drive, Lily spoke from the back seat. Mom? Yes, sweetheart? Can Grandma come live with us? Emily looked into the rearview mirror. Lily's eyes were full of hope. I don't want her to be lonely anymore. Emily couldn't stop the tears. She nodded slowly. Neither do I. The little girl smiled. Then let's ask her. Emily turned toward the dark road ahead. Oh, sweetheart, I hope we still can. Meanwhile, Margaret sat beside the hospital window. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of a heart monitor. She wasn't frightened, she was simply tired. A young nurse adjusted her blanket. Are you comfortable? Margaret smiled. You've been very kind. The nurse returned the smile. My grandmother always says kindness costs nothing. Your grandmother is a wise woman. The nurse hesitated before asking, is your family coming? Margaret looked out at the falling snow. I believe so. You sound very certain. Margaret smiled. She's never stopped coming. Sometimes, it just takes her a little longer. The nurse squeezed her hand gently before leaving the room. Margaret reached into her handbag. Inside were 3 things: the small voice recorder, a sealed envelope, and a photograph of Emily at age 6. Missing her front teeth and grinning at the camera with complete confidence that her mother could fix anything. Margaret kissed the photograph softly. My little girl. Back on the highway, Emily's phone rang again. The hospital. She answered immediately. Hello? The doctor spoke gently. Mrs. Parker? Yes. Your mother asked me to tell you something. Emily held her breath. She said, the doctor's voice softened. Tell Emily not to drive too fast. Emily let out a broken laugh through her tears. That sounds exactly like her. The doctor smiled on the other end. She also said, Christmas isn't about arriving on time. It's about arriving safely. Emily couldn't speak even now. Her mother was still protecting her, still worrying about her, still being a mom. The snowstorm worsened, traffic slowed, every red light felt unbearable. Emily checked the dashboard clock again, and again each minute seemed louder than the last. She whispered the same sentence over and over. Please wait for me. I'll be there. I'm coming, Mom. Miles away, Margaret looked toward the hospital room door. Every sound in the hallway made her lift her head. Every pair of footsteps filled her with hope, then passed by. She smiled anyway, because hope had never abandoned her, not once. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering one Christmas long ago. Emily had gotten lost in a crowded department store for nearly 10 terrifying minutes. Margaret had searched every aisle, calling her name. When she finally found her, Emily had burst into tears. I knew you'd come. Margaret had hugged her tightly. I'll always come for you. Now, the roles had quietly reversed. Margaret looked once more toward the door. I know you'll come. She whispered. I've never doubted you. Outside, the first light of Christmas morning began to touch the snowy horizon. Inside the hospital, one elderly mother continued waiting with a peaceful smile, and on the highway, one daughter prayed she wasn't already too late. The hospital came into view just as the first rays of morning painted the snow with soft shades of gold. Emily had never been so relieved to see a building in her life. Before the car had fully stopped, she was already reaching for the door. Emily! Jason called after her, but she was running. Her boots slipped against the icy pavement as she hurried through the hospital entrance. I need my mother. My mother. Margaret Parker. The receptionist recognized the name immediately. 4th floor. Emily didn't wait for another word. She ran toward the elevators. They were still coming down, too slow, much too slow. She turned and sprinted for the stairwell instead. 4 flights. Her lungs burned, her legs shook, but she never slowed down, not once. At the end of the hallway, she saw a nurse, the same young nurse who had stayed with Margaret during the night. The nurse's gentle smile disappeared the moment she recognized Emily. Her eyes filled with sympathy. Emily's heart dropped. No. She whispered. No. The nurse walked toward her slowly. I'm so sorry. Emily stared at her. What do you mean? The nurse swallowed. Your mother passed away peacefully a little while ago. The hallway became silent. Emily blinked. She heard the words, she simply couldn't understand them. No. You've made a mistake. I just spoke to the doctor. He said she was waiting for me. She was. The nurse's own voice trembled. She waited as long as she could. Emily's knees gave way. She sank onto the cold hospital floor. Everything around her became distant. The voices. The footsteps, the ringing phones, nothing sounded real anymore. Only one thought echoed through her heart. I was too late. Jason reached her moments later. He knelt beside her without saying a word. Some grief has no language. He simply held her hand. Emily cried harder than she had since she was a little girl. I told her, she whispered between sobs. I told her, next Christmas. Her voice broke. I kept saying, next time. There isn't a next time. Jason wrapped his arms around her. Neither of them noticed little Lily quietly standing a few feet away. She looked toward the hospital room. Then back at her mother. Can Grandma still hear us? Emily looked at her daughter. Fresh tears streamed down her face. I hope so. Lily nodded, then whispered toward the doorway, I love you, Grandma. The hallway fell silent again. Even the nurses wiped away tears. A few minutes later, the doctor approached. He carried a small brown paper bag. Mrs. Parker asked me to give you these. Emily accepted it with trembling hands. Inside were 3 things: the old digital voice recorder, a sealed envelope, and a small silver key. Attached to the key was a handwritten note. For the bottom drawer of my dresser. Emily stared at her mother's familiar handwriting. She gently traced each letter with her fingertips. The doctor smiled sadly. Your mother talked about you all night. Emily looked up. What did she say? The doctor hesitated, then answered quietly. She never asked why you weren't there. She only kept asking if you'd driven safely. Emily covered her mouth. Another wave of tears came even in her final hours. Her mother hadn't been thinking about herself, she had been thinking about her daughter. Later that afternoon, after completing the hospital paperwork, Emily drove to the little house. Snow still covered the front yard. Nothing had changed. The porch light remained on. The wind chime still danced gently in the cold breeze. For one impossible moment, Emily imagined opening the door and hearing her mother's cheerful voice. "There you are. I've got soup on the stove." Instead, only silence greeted her. She stepped inside slowly. The familiar scent of cinnamon still lingered in the air. Her mother's knitting rested neatly on the armchair. Reading glasses lay open on the coffee table beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. The old Christmas tree continued glowing softly in the corner. As though it had been waiting. Emily stood frozen. Then she noticed it. One gift wrapped in red paper. Her name written carefully across the tag. "For my little girl." Emily's hands began to shake. She dropped to her knees beside the tree just as she had when she was 5 years old, just as she had every Christmas morning of her childhood. Only this time, her mother wasn't sitting nearby smiling. She was gone. Emily hugged the present tightly against her chest. "I'm here," she whispered through tears. "I'm finally here." Jason quietly led the children into the kitchen, giving Emily time alone. The living room remained still, only the soft glow of the Christmas lights reflected in her tear-filled eyes. She slowly untied the ribbon. Inside the box rested a delicate silver snowflake necklace. Beneath it, a folded note. Emily unfolded it carefully. Her mother's handwriting filled the page. "My precious Emmy, if you're holding this gift, then Christmas has already given me everything I ever wanted. You came home. Please don't spend your life apologizing to someone who never stopped understanding you. I knew work was demanding. I knew the children needed you. I knew every reason before you ever explained it. Love doesn't keep score. It simply waits with the porch light on." Emily could barely breathe. The tears blurred every word. She continued reading. "This necklace reminded me of snowflakes. Beautiful because no two are the same. Families are like that too. Don't try to make yours perfect. Just make sure they know they're loved. And sweetheart, promise me one thing. Never let Christmas become so busy that the people you love become appointments on a calendar. Time whispers before it disappears. Listen while you still can." The letter slipped gently into Emily's lap. She cried without restraint, not because her mother had left her with sadness but because she had left her with nothing except love. A love so complete, it left no room for blame, only gratitude. Emily looked toward the old voice recorder resting on the coffee table. She picked it up carefully. Her thumb hovered over the play button. She closed her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready." Jason quietly walked back into the room. He knelt beside her. "You'll never be ready," he whispered. "But you'll always be grateful you listened." Emily took a long, trembling breath. Then, with tears still falling, she pressed play. The tiny speaker crackled to life and suddenly, the room filled once more with the gentle, familiar voice she had been longing to hear. "Hi, Emmy." Emily's heart stopped. It was as if Christmas itself had found one last way to bring her mother home. The little speaker crackled softly. Then came the voice Emily had heard thousands of times throughout her life, warm, gentle, familiar. "Hi, Emmy." Emily closed her eyes. For one impossible second, it felt as though her mother were sitting in the next room. "I've started this recording 3 different times." A quiet laugh followed. "You know me. I always wanted to get everything just right." Emily smiled through her tears. "Some things never change." Margaret continued. "If you're listening to this, then I suppose you're wondering why I didn't tell you everything. The answer is very simple. I wanted your last Christmas with me to be filled with joy, not fear. I wanted Lily to laugh. I wanted you to smile. I wanted one more holiday where you weren't carrying the weight of the world." Emily lowered her head. The tears fell onto her mother's letter. "I've watched you become an incredible woman. I've watched you become the kind of mother every child deserves. You've always worried that you weren't doing enough. Oh, Emmy, you've always been enough. Emily covered her mouth. She had spent years feeling guilty, years believing she had failed her mother, yet the woman she loved most had never seen failure, only love. Margaret's voice remained calm. Do you remember the year you were 8? Emily frowned, then smiled faintly. The year it snowed so much that we couldn't leave the house. We had no turkey. No fancy presents. The power went out. So we sat under blankets with flashlights. We ate peanut butter sandwiches for Christmas dinner. Emily laughed softly through her tears. I thought it was the best Christmas ever. So did I. Do you know why? Because you looked at me and said, as long as we're together, it still feels like Christmas. Margaret paused. I never forgot that. I hope you never do either. Silence filled the room for a few seconds, then her voice became even softer. Sweetheart, I need you to stop punishing yourself. If you've spent even 1 minute wondering whether I felt forgotten, I didn't. I felt loved. Every birthday card. Every hug. Every phone call. Every rushed text that simply said, "Love you, Mom." I saved every single one. Emily looked toward the small wooden cabinet beside the sofa. Without thinking, she opened it. Inside was a neat bundle of birthday cards tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Every Mother's Day card, every handwritten note, even little drawings Lily had mailed years earlier. Margaret had kept them all, every single one. Emily broke down completely. She had never imagined those little gestures meant so much. Margaret continued speaking. People think love is measured by grand moments. It isn't. It's measured by ordinary Tuesdays. By checking if someone got home safely. By sharing the last cookie. By remembering how they take their tea. Emily looked toward the kitchen. The old blue mug still sat beside the sink, her mother's favorite, the one with the tiny chip on the handle that Margaret refused to throw away. Everything suddenly mattered, everything. The voice recorder played on. I have one last wish. When Christmas comes each year, please leave one empty chair at the table. Not because I want you to be sad. But because I want you to remember. There's always room for one more person. A neighbor. A friend. Someone who's spending Christmas alone. Invite them. Feed them. Listen to their stories. No one should wonder whether anybody remembered them on Christmas. Emily wiped her eyes. She nodded instinctively. I promise. Margaret laughed softly. I knew you would. Another brief silence followed, then came the words that would stay with Emily for the rest of her life. You know, parents spend most of their lives teaching their children how to live. But children teach their parents something too. You taught me that even after heartbreak, even after losing your father, life could still be beautiful. You gave my days purpose. You gave my house laughter. You gave my heart a reason to keep beating. So if today you're grieving me, don't thank me. Then go live. Love your family. Take too many pictures. Laugh too loudly. Forgive quickly. Call the people you miss. And never assume there will always be another Christmas. Margaret took one slow breath. When she spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. Thank you for making me your mom. I have loved you every day of your life. And I will keep loving you, in every Christmas snowflake, in every warm kitchen, in every child who laughs with frosting on their face, and in every quiet moment when you think of me. Merry Christmas, my little girl. I'll always be with you. The recording ended, the tiny red light faded, the room became silent. Emily held the recorder against her heart. She cried until there were no tears left, not because she had been abandoned, but because she had been loved so completely. The weeks that followed were difficult. The little house felt impossibly empty, but Emily honored every wish her mother had left behind. She kept the recipe book. She framed the page titled The Secret Ingredient and hung it in her kitchen. She planted Margaret's favorite white roses beneath the front window. She refused to repaint the height marks on the hallway wall. Every line told a story, every inch measured love. 1 year later, Christmas arrived once again. Snow covered the neighborhood just as it always had, but this Christmas felt different. Emily's dining table stretched farther than ever before. Jason smiled as he carried another chair into the room. Lily looked around curiously. Mom, why is there an extra place at the table? Emily smiled. She gently touched the silver snowflake necklace resting around her neck. Because Grandma asked us to leave room for someone. A knock came at the front door. Standing outside was Mr. Henderson, an elderly widower from down the street. Emily had noticed him collecting his mail alone every morning. She remembered her mother's words. No one should spend Christmas wondering if they were forgotten. She opened the door with the warmest smile she could offer. Merry Christmas. We were hoping you'd join us. The old man blinked in surprise. For dinner? For the whole day. His eyes filled with tears. I don't want to be any trouble. Lily stepped forward and reached for his hand. My grandma said there's always room for one more. The old man couldn't speak. He simply nodded. Inside, laughter soon filled the house. Children ran through the hallway. Cookies burned slightly in the oven. Someone spilled hot chocolate. Jason pretended he wasn't the one who had dropped an entire bowl of mashed potatoes. Everyone laughed until their stomachs hurt. Emily looked toward the corner of the living room. There stood her mother's old Christmas tree, still a little crooked. Still missing a few lights, still beautiful. She smiled through happy tears, not tears of regret, not anymore, only gratitude. She quietly whispered toward the glowing tree, Merry Christmas, Mom. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't end with goodbye. Outside, gentle snowflakes drifted from the night sky, covering the world in peaceful white. Inside, the house was warm, the table was full. No chair was empty for long, and though Margaret was no longer there to pour the tea or straighten the ornaments, the greatest gift she had ever given her family remained alive. It wasn't the necklace, it wasn't the letters. It wasn't even the final voicemail. It was the lesson that love is never measured by the number of Christmases we shared, it's measured by how deeply we cherish the people sitting beside us while we still can. And in that little house, where laughter once again echoed through every room, Margaret's greatest wish had quietly come true. Christmas had come home.